I'd been living solo in the old Shaker house on Elm Street for about a year before the money got tight. That's when I decided to rent out the basement. It was a separate unit, fully furnished, with its own little kitchenette and bath. It wasn't long before I got a bite. An application from a guy named Simon. He was quiet, polite, and his credit check cleared. Perfect tenant, or so I thought. Simon moved in on a Sunday. He had this intense look about him, eyes that never seemed to blink, and a stack of leather-bound books he handled like they were made of glass. He didn't have much else. No TV, no radio, just those books and a few changes of clothes. The first few weeks were uneventful. I'd hear him come and go at odd hours, but that was city living for you. It wasn't until the noises started that I began to question my decision. It was subtle at first, a low chanting that I thought was some weird music drifting up through the vents. But then it got louder, more insistent, and it was definitely coming from Simon's place. One night, the chanting woke me up. It was past midnight, and there was this rhythmic thumping that vibrated through the floorboards. I lay there, heart pounding, as a cold draft slipped beneath my bedroom door. I told myself it was just Simon being eccentric, that he probably joined some new age group or something. But then came the symbols. They started appearing around the basement door. Strange, angular shapes drawn in chalk. I confronted Simon about it, and he just gave me this placid smile and said it was for protection. Protection from what he wouldn't say. I should have kicked him out then, but he was always on time with rent, and I needed the money. So I let it slide. A decision I'd soon regret. It all came to a head one stormy night. The wind was howling, and the rain beat against the windows like it was trying to get in. I couldn't sleep, the storm too loud, too angry. That's when I heard it. A scream, cut short, coming from the basement. I bolted upright, my heart a jackhammer in my chest. It was probably the TV, I thought, trying to calm my nerves. Simon must have finally bought one and cranked the volume too high. But as I strained my ears, the chanting started again, this time accompanied by the unmistakable sound of something heavy being dragged across the basement floor. I slipped out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor as I grabbed the baseball bat I kept for protection. The rational part of my brain was telling me to call the cops, but the rest of me needed to know what was happening in my own house. I crept down the hallway, the noises growing louder, more frenzied with each step. As I approached the basement door, the air felt charged, like the electric buzz before a lightning strike. The symbols Simon had drawn seemed to quiver in the dim light, and I hesitated. This was madness. Whatever was happening below was none of my business. I should turn back, lock my door, and wait for the police. But then another scream pierced the night, followed by a chorus of whispers that seemed to seep through the cracks in the floor. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob, the bat slick with sweat in my other hand. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The stairs descended into darkness, the only light a flickering candle glow that did little to penetrate the shadows. I could barely make out the shapes of people, robed figures standing in a circle. The chanting was louder now, a language I couldn't recognize, and in the center of the circle was Simon, arms raised as if conducting the madness. I descended, each step creaking under my weight. The figures didn't notice me, they were too caught up in their ritual. My heart throbbed in my ears, drowning out reason. I reached the bottom of the stairs, and that's when I saw it. A mannequin, dressed in tattered clothes, lying prone in the center of the circle. It was part of their ritual, a prop in some twisted scene. I stood frozen, the grotesque scene before me etched into my mind like a sinister tableau. Simon stepped forward, his face shrouded in shadows, yet I could feel the intensity of his gaze. The chanting ceased, and the silence that followed was deafening. "Look, I can explain," Simon declared, his voice steady but with an edge that hinted at urgency. The robed figures around him remained motionless, their heads now turned towards me, their faces obscured. My grip on the baseball bat tightened, a futile attempt at defense against the bizarre spectacle. "Explain," I managed to say, my voice a mix of fear and demand. I needed answers, and yet, part of me wanted to bolt up those stairs and never look back. Simon's hands were raised in a placating gesture, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "It's not what it looks like," he said, motioning to the circle of silent figures. "We're actors. This is a rehearsal, an immersive piece for an independent film I'm working on." I squinted, trying to discern the truth in the dim candlelight. The circle broke apart, and the figures pushed back their hoods, revealing ordinary, if somewhat embarrassed, faces. They looked like any group of struggling artists you might find in the city. My skepticism must have shown because Simon quickly added, "I know it seems strange, but we needed a space to practice, and the basement seemed perfect. I didn't mean to scare you. I should have asked." I weighed my options. The mannequin in the center of the circle was just a prop, its lifeless form far less menacing in the light of Simon's explanation. Still, the fear I'd felt was real, and Simon's secrecy hadn't helped. "You can't do this here," I said firmly, the authority in my voice surprising even me. "You've got to find somewhere else, and you need to leave." Simon nodded, a look of genuine remorse crossing his features. "Of course, I apologize for all this. We'll be out by tomorrow," he turned to the group, issuing quiet instructions. They began to clear away the candles and the other oddities, their movements swift and practiced. True to his word, by the next day, Simon and his peculiar troupe were gone. The basement was empty, the strange symbols wiped clean, but the echoes of that night lingered. I never saw Simon again, and I didn't report him to the police. He knew where I lived, and the thought of him holding a grudge was enough to keep me silent. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, I can almost hear the faintest whisper of chanting, and I wonder if what I saw was truly just rehearsal for a film. But I leave the basement locked now, and I've never tried to rent it out again. The memory of that night, the fear and the bizarre ritual I'd witnessed, has turned the basement into a place I avoid. A chilling reminder of the tenant who brought his unsettling vision a little too close to reality. I never believed in the "if it's too good to be true." It probably is thing until I bought the house on Maple Street. It was one of those old colonial homes, the kind with history in its bones and a price tag that made you wonder what the catch was. I figured it needed some work, and I was right. But it wasn't the creaky floorboards or the outdated wiring that should have sent me running. It was the basement. The first time I went down there was to check out the furnace. The air was musty, thick with the scent of damp earth and neglect. I remember fumbling for the light switch and finding, instead, a string that clicked on a single, bare bulb hanging from a beam. It swung gently, casting shadows that seemed to dance on the stone walls. That's when I noticed the holes, small, round, and too regular to be a coincidence. They were peepholes, scattered across the basement walls like silent eyes. My first thought was practical. Maybe they were for ventilation or some old-fashioned plumbing thing. But the more I looked, the less sense they made. They were at different heights, some at eye level, others near the floor. I tried to laugh it off, to tell myself that there was a rational explanation, but there was a feeling I couldn't shake, like I was being watched. I chalked it up to new house jitters and went back upstairs. It wasn't until that night, lying in bed, that I heard it. A scratching sound, faint but persistent, coming from below. It was probably just a raccoon or something, I thought. Houses like these were bound to have critters in the walls. I decided to deal with it in the morning. But sleep didn't come easy. Every creak and groan of the old house set me on edge. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the image of those peepholes. Eventually exhaustion won, and I drifted off. I woke to darkness, the kind that felt heavy, like a blanket smothering me. My heart pounded as I realized the sound had woken me. The scratching, but louder now, more urgent. It was coming from the direction of the basement door. I grabbed my phone for light and crept toward the sound. The door was ajar, which was odd because I was sure I'd closed it. I pushed it open, the hinges whining in protest. The sound stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence that felt like a held breath. I stood at the top of the stairs, my phone's dim light revealing the first few steps. I should have turned back, called someone, anyone, but I didn't. I needed to know. Step by cautious step, I descended into the basement. The scratching had stopped, but now I heard something else. A soft, raspy breathing that wasn't my own. My skin prickled with every breath I took. The light from my phone swept over the walls, the peepholes like dark, accusing eyes. And then I saw it. A shadow moving in one of them. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was real. There was something in the walls, something watching me. I don't know what possessed me, but I moved closer, my hand reaching out to one of the holes. I had to see. My eye pressed to the cold stone, and for a moment I saw nothing but darkness. Then, a flash of movement, a glimpse of pale skin, and an eye, wide, unblinking, and staring right back at me. A scream lodged in my throat as I stumbled backward, my phone clattering to the ground, its light spinning wildly before settling on the far wall. Adrenaline flooded my system, every instinct screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. They were rubber, useless. I crawled toward my phone, the only source of light in the suffocating blackness. As I reached for it, the breathing grew louder, closer. It was right on top of me. I snatched the phone up and swung the light around frantically. There, a figure, hunched and ragged, emerged from a hidden door within the wall. A door I hadn't noticed before. It was a man, or something that had once been a man, his features twisted in a grotesque sneer. He moved toward me with an unsettling gait, his hands outstretched, fingers gnarled like the roots of an ancient tree. I scrambled to my feet, my back slamming against a cold, damp wall. The figure lunged, a guttural sound erupting from its throat, and I dodged instinctively. My shoulder crashed into a shelving unit, sending jars and old paint cans tumbling down. The noise was deafening in the confined space. I felt something sharp graze my arm, and I realized in that moment that the figure wasn't trying to harm me. It was reaching for something behind me. Gasping for air, my heart a drumbeat in my chest, I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw an old, rusted wrench that had fallen from the shelf. Without thinking, I grabbed it, the weight of the metal cold and solid in my hand. The figure hesitated, its grotesque face inches from mine, and in that brief pause, I saw it clearly for the first time. It wasn't a monster, it was a man, his eyes wide with the same primal fear that was coursing through me. Whatever madness had driven him to live within these walls, he was human, and he was scared. I brandished the wrench with a shaky hand, not sure if I could use it but desperate to make him believe I could. "Get back," I shouted, my voice hoarse. The man recoiled as if I'd struck him, and I saw my chance. I bolted, my legs finally regaining their strength, and I sprinted for the stairs. The man didn't follow. Instead, he vanished back through the secret door in the wall, disappearing into the darkness from which he'd come. I didn't stop to look back, didn't pause to catch my breath. I took the stairs 2 at a time, my only thought to put as much distance between that man and me as possible. I reached the top, slammed the basement door shut, and threw the deadbolt. My whole body was shaking, every sound amplified to a roar in my ears. I stumbled through the dark house, my mind a whirlwind of panic and confusion. The phone. I needed the phone. My fingers fumbled over the touchscreen, missing the emergency call button twice before I managed to dial 911. I didn't wait for an answer, I just ran, clutching my phone, into the bathroom and locked the door behind me. I slid to the floor, the cold tile against my back, and finally, a voice came through the phone. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's calm tone was a lifeline in the chaos of my terror. There's someone in my house, I gasped out, my voice a whisper. In the walls of my basement. He was watching me through peepholes. I could hear the operator typing as I gave my address, my words tumbling out in a frantic rush. She told me to stay on the line, that officers were on their way, and to keep the door locked. I nodded before realizing she couldn't see me, clutching the phone like a talisman against the horror that had invaded my home. Time lost meaning as I sat there, listening to the operator's reassurances while my eyes darted to the bathroom door, half expecting it to burst open. But it didn't. Instead, the distant wail of sirens grew louder, and I've never felt more relieved than when I heard the sound of police officers announcing themselves at my front door. It was over, I told myself. It was over. But as I finally let the tension ebb away from my body, one thought lingered in my mind. The man had known this house, had moved through its hidden spaces with a familiarity that spoke of years, not days. And as I waited for the police to find and apprehend him, I couldn't shake the feeling that my house would never truly be my own again,